Thank you for joining our Career Compass webinar today, a six-part series from Major Lindsey and Africa's Interim Legal Talent Team. Today we will focus on interviewing tips. My name is Heather Nielsen and I'll be your moderator behind the scenes. I work on the marketing team here at MLA and I'm excited to be hosting this session today with my colleagues Megan Nelson, Betsy Sin, and Laura Weir. Before we get to it, let's go over a few housekeeping items. You should all be able to see the screen right now and hopefully hear my voice. The phone lines, however, are muted, so although you can hear me, we cannot hear you. That said, you can still ask us questions and we encourage you to do so. At the top right of your screen is the GoToWebinar panel. Just open up the console, type a question, and hit submit. Feel free to submit questions at any time. Your questions are anonymous and your name will not be shared with Megan, Betsy, or Laura, or the rest of the audience. Today's webinar will be approximately 30 minutes of interview best practices, followed by plenty of time for Q&A. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, one of our team, or Megan, Betsy, or Laura will follow up directly afterward. Lastly, we will record the webinar and it will be available on our website within the next few days. We'll also provide a quick survey at the end of the webinar that we hope that you will complete. It should take 2 to 3 minutes tops. Before I turn this over to the ladies for brief introductions, I want to give you a little bit of background on who Interim Legal Talent is. Major Lindsey and Africa's Interim Legal Talent Team offers experienced attorneys and legal professionals access to long-term consulting opportunities within Fortune 500 legal departments and AM Law 200 firms. While Major Lindsey and Africa has been around for more than 35 plus years, MLA's Interim Legal Talent Team was established back in 2010. We have 40 plus recruiters worldwide and operate out of 12 offices globally. And last year, we filled over 410 assignments. We offer both part-time and full-time consulting opportunities so that you can explore the opportunity that best fits into your professional and personal needs. Now that I've told you a little bit about who we are, I'd like to turn this over to Megan, Betsy, and Laura for brief introductions on who they are. Here you go, ladies.
Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Nelson. I'm a managing director with Major Lindsey in Africa. I joined the company in 2019. I have over 12 years experience recruiting attorneys, paralegals, and professional staff. Before I became a recruiter, I was an attorney with a small medical malpractice law firm in Chicago, and I live in the suburbs of Chicago.
Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Sin, and I am a managing director also with MLA's Interim Legal Talent Team. I attended Miami University in Ohio and previously worked at NBC and on Capitol Hill before joining MLA's Chicago office back in 2011. Throughout my career here at MLA, I've helped to place paralegals, compliance officers, contract attorneys, and interim general counsel with both corporate legal departments and law firms. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Weir, and I joined MLA in 2015. I attended Valparaiso University School of Law while also continuing to work in the legal field. Prior to my recruiting career, I was first a paralegal and later an associate attorney in a mid-sized workers' compensation firm, and I live in the suburbs of Chicago. Now that we've had a chance to introduce ourselves, I'm excited to start us off with a quick overview of the agenda for our time together. As a recruiter, I find that one of the topics candidates have the most questions about is interviewing. In today's webinar, our goal is to take you through the interview process and share some of our best practices for preparing for an interview, what types of questions you may encounter, as well as some interview do's and don'ts. As many of you probably experienced before COVID, the traditional interview process we would encounter after presenting candidates to the client was that a hiring manager would typically conduct an initial phone screen followed by 1 or 2 in-person interviews before an offer was given. Prior to COVID, it was very common to see this process take weeks as we worked to coordinate in-person meetings and manage logistics. Since the start of the stay-at-home orders due to COVID-19, we've seen many of our clients adapt. These days, the interview process looks very different. As some of you may have experienced, the process has gone entirely virtual. While phone screens are still commonly the first step in the process, we're now finding clients are embracing a range of technology platforms to conduct video interviews instead of in-person interviews. As we'll share later in the webinar, this new interview process requires candidates also make adjustments in how they prepare and present themselves on video interviews. But considering the current pandemic, the rather quick transition to video interviews has enabled us to not only engage candidates with new opportunities, but also help streamline the hiring process. I've recently partnered with several candidates whose entire hiring process took place virtually, and in one case, we had a client move through the virtual interview and hire process in less than 2 weeks. Furthermore, since the pandemic has started, we've had only 2 clients that needed someone on site because they were essential businesses. The rest have all begun work remotely. While it's hard to know exactly what the future of hiring will look like, one thing is for certain. Companies will continue to need top talent and will continue to get creative in their effort to attract and engage candidates. Our job as recruiters is to keep an eye on these trends and keep our candidates updated on these interview best practices, no matter what the hiring process looks like in the future. Preparing for any interview is critical. One of the first questions I ask candidates when we start preparing for a client interview is whether they've researched the company and the hiring manager. If you haven't done your research, it will come through in your interview. As I just mentioned, it's important to do your due diligence before any interview. When it comes to researching the company, there are several sources to gather information from: the company website, social media platforms such as LinkedIn, recent news on the organization. I always suggest you look on the company's website for this and also do a quick Google search on recent news. When you're researching hiring managers or other interviewees, I always suggest looking at either their professional profile on the company's site or on LinkedIn. It's always helpful to review how long they've been at the firm, where they've worked in the past, and any potential common interests like schools, clubs, organizations, or firms. Whenever possible, I suggest looking for a small piece of common ground. It's a great icebreaker, and I know when I find something in common with someone and they mention it, I remember that person. An example I like to share: earlier this year, I had a candidate who was a great fit for a role but didn't make it past the initial phone interview. When I asked for feedback, the hiring manager replied that while they had been impressed with the individual's background, it was clear the candidate had not done the necessary research on the company and the job. So the questions the candidate asked missed the mark, and the hiring manager worried about their attention to detail. While this isn't always the case, it was a good reminder that it's better to prepare for each interview and to make sure you go into each conversation having done your research on the company, the job, and the interviewee. While there are many benefits to working with a recruiter, the interview process is an area where you can really leverage this expertise and behind-the-scenes knowledge your recruiter has. Many times when you're applying for jobs and getting invited into interviews, unless you know someone who works or has worked at an organization, you're going into the interview relatively blind. However, when it comes to details surrounding your interview, your recruiter has done the work for you. Whether it's the seemingly small logistical details that can actually be nerve-wracking, or the ever-important soft skills that will help you. It's our job as recruiters to help each of our candidates be prepared enough that they stand the best chance at winning their interview. A few examples of things we can and will do our best to share are the best way to get to the interview and where to park, what security looks like, what you need to get in the building. Earlier this year, I had a candidate interviewing with a company in the Merchandise Mart downtown Chicago. If you've ever been to the Merchandise Mart, you know what a maze it can be. Part of preparing for an interview is figuring out where you need to go. I was able to take part of the stress away and tell my candidate exactly which entrance to take, since there are several, which elevator banks would get into the company's reception, and where to find help if needed. Your recruiter will also tell you how to dress and who to ask for upon arrival. Any previous tips or questions we know the hiring manager may focus on, and what questions you may want to ask. Furthermore, after every interview, I'll work closely with each candidate to discuss the interview and to review all the pros and cons of the opportunity. I'll also be sure to get interview feedback from the client to share with the candidate. So in the future, if you're ever working with a recruiter when pursuing a job, definitely make sure to ask lots of questions. Now, Megan's going to take you through some slides about interview questions.
Thanks, Laura. So while most interviews are on the conversational side, rehearsing answers is still extremely helpful. The STAR method of interviewing is a really effective way to answer questions for a wide range of questions, especially for those requiring an anecdotal answer, such as tell me about a time you or have you ever done this. The STAR method of interviewing is taking a situation and describing it or an event, explaining the task that you had to complete, describing the specific actions you took to complete the task, and closing with the result of your efforts. The STAR method allows you to effectively relate a specific success. The result should always be a way in which your actions have positively affected your workplace. I had one paralegal candidate interviewing for a corporate position. In her old job, she had implemented new software to help the board, and it allowed them to communicate and get information more efficiently. And it was a huge hit with the board. Having a couple of examples like this of your own that you have rehearsed is extremely helpful during the interview. As far as which questions you should ask, you should always ask questions during the interview. Typically, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the conversation, and don't let an interview be one way. Remember that you are interviewing the potential employer as well. When the interviewer asks you at the end of the interview if you have any questions, the answer is always yes. Have one question ready to complete the interview and be strategic with your questions. Use them to do your due diligence. Find out more about the job, the work culture, and see if these are a fit for you. Also, asking questions, especially early in the interview, will help you understand what is most important to the person you're speaking with, and you can highlight your experiences accordingly for effective answers to questions. It also demonstrates interest in a position and shows that you are thinking about a job. For example, I had one candidate interviewing with a beverage company. She saw an article about restaurant deliveries when quarantine first happened, and she used that headline in that article to ask questions about how quarantine affected the business she was interviewing with. Finally, questions allow you and the employer to clear yellow flags. Did the interviewer say anything that gave you pause? Here's your chance to clear that up. And if the interviewer is on the fence about your background or skill set, you have the chance to address those concerns head on. So what kind of questions should you ask? There are lots to choose from, but there are a few that can really help you interview effectively. The first two I have here are useful to ask towards the beginning of the interview. Asking, for example, about abilities and skills and how success is measured will provide key information to you about what to highlight in your background and experience. Asking about short and long-term goals is also helpful early on. Are these goals you're excited about? What kind of commitment will you need to make to achieve these goals? Does it fit in with other commitments you have or your own career goals? Addressing fit during the interview can really help you interview effectively. The next two questions I have here are helpful to ask towards the end of the interview, especially asking the interviewer themselves why they like working where they work. Yields a positive response and should help end things on a very positive note. I had one candidate who asked that question at the end of his interviewer, and the interviewer ended up telling his whole life story in response. This incredible rapport building question definitely helped that candidate land the job. The final question on this list is really, really awkward, but it can be critical. And the interviewer will rarely bring it up on their own, even in the most conversational setting, so you have to ask. This is a huge opportunity for you to close the sale, so to speak. Also, the interviewer might not have any reservations about hiring you, and you have just reinforced this in the interview also. And now here's my colleague Betsy Fitz to talk about the interviews themselves.
Thanks, Megan. These days, phone interviews are common first-round interviews for most candidates. In preparing for phone interviews, you'll want to be sure to check your connection. Take the call from a reliable location that you know has good cell service. It's disruptive for both you and the interviewer to hear background noises. Prepare ahead of time to help reduce distracting sounds. If you're at home like most of us are these days, close doors and windows to help eliminate outside noises. If you live with other people, give them a heads up that you'll be on an important call. If you're like me and you have Amazon deliveries regularly, think about putting a do not disturb note on your front door so the delivery person doesn't ring the doorbell when dropping off the package. There's a tendency, particularly if you're taking the call from home, to be more lax. For example, I've conducted phone interviews in the past where it's been obvious that the person on the other line was walking around the house multitasking. I've even heard toilets flushing in the background. This is not only distracting, but it shows you're not giving the interviewer your full and undivided attention, which could lead you to miss out on important information. I can assure you the interviewer is taking this call as seriously as an in-person meeting, and so should you. Don't be too casual in conversation and be professional. You'll want to do all of the standard preparation that Laura and Megan previously noted. Your interviewer will be checking to make sure that you have a real interest in the company and the position. The best way to demonstrate this is to show that you've done your homework. Review the firm or company website and be prepared to discuss what interests you about that organization. Review the interviewer's profile on LinkedIn or web bio if they happen to have one. Review the position description or job posting. Prepare questions you'd like to ask ahead of time, and be ready to answer the standard questions about your past experience that Megan noted earlier. Even before COVID came onto the scene, it was becoming increasingly popular for employers to schedule a video conference interview instead of an in-person meeting. These interviews are more personal than phone interviews, but they may still feel a bit uncomfortable. I'm sure a decent percentage of folks on the call today have seen an increase in video conference meetings the past few months. While we've become familiar with the idea of attending a video conference with many other people, in an interview, the focus will solely be on you. These tips will help you control the situation from your side of the camera. Once you've scheduled the interview, you'll want to select a space that is free of distractions and interruptions. A public location like a coffee shop is not going to be your best bet. The background of the shot must be tidy and distraction-free. We suggest finding a quiet and clean space like a home office or a conference room so that the interviewer is both visually and audibly focused on you. One of the things I've noticed the most when watching video interviews on the news lately is poor lighting. If you haven't noticed this yourself, pay attention the next time you watch the news. The best option is to have lighting slightly above, but not directly above, and in front of both you and the camera. This will help to eliminate shadows and illuminate you properly. In regard to background noise, follow the same tips we previously mentioned for phone interviews. In selecting a device, a computer with a wired connection is always going to be your best choice. However, if you would prefer to use a phone or a tablet, those will also work. Whatever option you choose, just be sure to put the device on a stable and flat surface. You don't want to be holding the device just in case you have an unsteady hand due to interview jitters. In order to avoid a shutdown or a battery outage, make sure that your device is fully charged before, and if possible, we suggest leaving it plugged in to a power source for the duration of the interview just in case. If you've never used this type of technology before, we encourage you to become familiar with the software. Make sure that your camera and microphone work within the application itself. That's really important. And practice using the technology. Feel free to ask your recruiter, your mentor, or a close friend to do a mock interview with you using the video conferencing platform. Dress like you would for an in-person interview. Wear business attire or a suit. Even though the interviewer will likely only see you from the chest up, you should be dressed professionally from head to toe. I'm sure a lot of us have seen examples of folks on social media recently who weren't properly dressed from head to toe, and while it may be comical to see these mishaps online, I promise you it won't be as funny if it happens to you. So be sure to wear a full professional outfit. In conducting the interview, you'll want to make sure to make eye contact. Over the past few months, we've all seen health experts and politicians being interviewed via video on the news. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has noticed that most of them don't look at the camera on their device, which ends up looking like they're not making eye contact. Here are a few tips to help fix that. When positioning your device, make sure that the camera is eye level and roughly about 1 to 2 feet away from you. Don't look at yourself or the interviewer on the screen. I know that's easier said than done. Instead, imagine that the interviewer is sitting right behind the camera lens. If you look directly at the camera itself, you will appear to be making eye contact with the interviewer on his or her screen. Come to this interview with the same energy and positive vibe that you would an in-person meeting. Don't make any sudden movements because this can appear blurry on the screen. And keep your hands comfortably either on your lap or on a flat surface so you can avoid talking with your hands and fidgeting. Having a conversation via video can be difficult, and it's easy to accidentally interrupt each other. One way to avoid this is just simply to wait a second or two to make sure the interviewer is done speaking before you begin to talk. The main reason for this is that there can be a delay in video and audio transmission, and by waiting a couple of seconds, you should eliminate the possibility of accidentally interrupting someone. As the interview is coming to a close, concisely reiterate your interest and fit for the role. Thank the interviewer for his or her time, and don't forget to properly close out and exit out of the software application. We know video interviews may be new for some of you, so we've put together a little reference guide with some specific details and tips. Directions on how to download the guide are up on the screen now. There will come a time when in-person interviews become part of the process again. When the time comes to return to in-person interviews, here are some best practices for you to keep in mind. Bring several copies of your resume. Make sure you proofread your resume and can speak to any experience you have listed. Bring something to take notes. I usually suggest a professional portfolio, but at the very least, a clean notepad and pen. Unless you've been told otherwise, wear a traditional suit or dress to your interview. It will show you're serious about an opportunity and also serious about yourself. Again, these are small details, but make sure to turn off electronics, remove sunglasses or hats, and don't be chewing gum. Give yourself enough time to get into the interview space. My suggestion here is to plan to arrive at least 10 minutes early, but no more than 15 minutes early. This way, if security takes a bit extra time, you aren't racing up the stairs frazzled. If you are more than 15 minutes early, take that time in the downstairs lobby, in the car, or in a nearby coffee shop before you head up to the office. Most importantly, be professional and courteous to everyone you meet. You have no idea whose input will go into making a hiring decision. It may seem small, but I have had candidates receive negative feedback because they were rude to the receptionist or someone they passed in the hallway.
Thanks, Laura. So what do you do after the interview? You are still being evaluated even after a very successful interview. So always send a thank you note. An email thank you note should come within 24 hours of the interview. It should be short and sweet, just thanking the interviewer for their time and reiterating your interest in the position. A follow-up snail mail is a nice touch. Express your continued interest in the position. Any number of things could slow down the process. A negative development in the company that stalls hiring, a change in the scope of the job that causes the company to interview others, or even the ascendancy of another candidate. If things drag on, you should make sure your recruiter knows that you remain interested. Make sure to check in with them as needed and always communicate any updates or changes in your job search. Also, if the employer issues any follow-up requests, such as a writing sample or transcripts, be sure to send these items over according to the timeline established in your interview.
Lastly, we'd like to go over general interview do's and don'ts. Be honest about your experience. You don't want to over or undersell yourself. Be prepared to provide specific examples of the matters that you've worked on. Be sure to provide the employer or recruiter with your preferred method of communication, and then be sure that you are responsive. If you've told them that you prefer to text, make sure you're checking your phone regularly and responding in a timely fashion. After each new stage of the interviewing process, determine if you are still interested in moving forward with that opportunity. You don't want to interview solely with the hopes of receiving an offer to take back to your current employer. Fishing for a counter offer from your current firm or company may not end up the way you'd like it to, and too often, candidates who go this route end up tarnishing their reputation within the company and in the market. If your employer or recruiter asks about your expectations in regard to salary, timing, or commitment expectations, be honest with what you're looking for. For example, there have been times when candidates mention that they're looking for a particular salary range, and when it comes down to the offer phase, then they suddenly, maybe $20,000 more. This scenario rarely plays out well for the candidate, and it is best to be upfront about compensation expectations if asked. Another example, if you're ending a temporary assignment and are looking for a new project, or if you recently lost your job and need something new ASAP, let your recruiter and or potential employer know your timing expectations. If a temporary role is looking for someone to commit to working for 6 months, but you know you can only work for 3 months, let them know, and then they can decide if it's appropriate to move forward. We know the job interview process is often overwhelming for many, no matter how seasoned a professional you are. While every interview is different, following the tips we provided today will increase your chances of success. Good luck as you take each step in the process. And remember, Your recruiter is in your corner and waiting to hear about your interview experiences. Now we're going to hand it over to Heather, and then we'd love to open it up for some questions.
Thank you, Megan, Betsy, and Laura for discussing interview tips with us today and helping our audience be best prepared for their next interview. While I give everybody a few seconds to type in your questions, and ladies, get ready, there's a lot of questions. I'd like to plug the next few webinars in our 6-part series from our interim legal talent team. We will take the month off for August and return again in the fall, and we will come back with partnering with your recruiter on September 30th, negotiating offers and counter offers on October 20th, and lastly, integrating into a new team on November 18th. Also, if you missed our 2 prior workshops, Resume Best Practices or Leveraging LinkedIn, you can find these on the multimedia section of our website, mlaglobal.com. Okay, first up, I'm going to go with Betsy and just give you guys a heads up. I'm going to send these back and forth to you. And if you need to fill in for your colleague and add something to it, just let me know. Betsy, the first question I have for you is, what if I'm running late or need to reschedule my interview at the absolute last minute?
That's a good question. In a perfect world, hopefully you would have left in enough time to avoid traffic or any parking issues, getting lost. However, if you are running late for whatever reason, you need to let your recruiter know ASAP. Your recruiter can then reach out to the client or the potential employer to let them know and help finesse that conversation on your behalf.
Great. Let's see, next one for Megan. This person says that they were let go from their job recently. How do they address that during the interview process?
Great question. So the important thing is to rehearse your answer and game that question. You'll want to remain as positive as you possibly can, or at least neutral. Just remember that any negativity that you bring up during the interview about a former employer or any coworkers doesn't reflect well on you. So rehearse the answer to that question with your recruiter, with a friend, to make sure that it's neutral or positive in the best light it can be.
Great. Okay. Laura, this kind of goes along with what Megan was talking about, but how do you spin your bad work experience into a positive one?
That's a great question. So it will definitely depend on the situation. You should be able to step back, look at the situation as a whole, and pull out a good experience from it. You don't have to be too detailed either. You can acknowledge a situation, but always spin it in a positive way. So examples could be, I was able to work with someone who expressed themselves very differently from me. It was an opportunity to work on my communication and leadership skills. So something along those lines, but always spinning it positive is the big takeaway.
Okay, let's see. Next one I have for Megan. It says, I'm pregnant. Should I say something during the interview process? Do I need to bring that up?
There is no one answer to this question. You need to go with your own comfort level. The only thing that applies to anybody who needs to work this out with themselves is to know that you are not obligated to disclose that you are pregnant. So from there, it's just a matter of what you're most comfortable doing.
And it's not always a bad experience. I actually interviewed for the job that I have now at MLA while I was 9 months pregnant. And the way that it went for me was I just walked in and said, I know I'm really pregnant, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to meet with you. This is the direction I want my career to go in. So if you find yourself in that situation, I got a positive response from that.
Great, Laura, then that perfect segue. How do you answer the question, why are you looking for a new opportunity?
Oh, great. So you can definitely always use the, I want my career to go in this direction answer as well, but you definitely should have some canned answers ready. I think a good response should include kind of a broad statement of what you learned at your current company or old company, and then finish with what the new company could offer you by way of improving in that area. So, for an example, it could be in my current role, I found I had a strong passion for not only drafting contracts, but also negotiating contracts. And my current company is structured in a way that I don't get much exposure into the negotiating piece. So the position with your company would allow me to continue drafting, but also become more involved in the negotiation process.
Okay, Betsy, money. Let's talk some about money. Can I talk about money during my interview?
I recommend that candidates should avoid bringing up compensation until they get closer to the offer stage of the process. One of the benefits of working with a legal recruiter is that they can help with conversations regarding compensation. Your recruiter, hopefully, will discuss your compensation expectations with you before submitting you for a particular position, because we want to make sure that the role matches up, obviously, with your experience level, but we also really want to make sure that the position is going to align with what you're looking for salary-wise as well. And your recruiter can also help you formulate a response in case a potential employer broaches the subject in an interview, and that, I feel like that's usually done on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, Betsy, while we're still talking about that, what about benefits? Can they talk about benefits, or is that something they should talk with the recruiter ahead of time, or how would you approach that?
That's a good question. I mean, I recommend going over that. If there's something that you're going to need, if you need to work from home, 1 or 2 days a week because the commute is, longer than what you're used to or something like that, or if you have, 20 plus PTO days and you don't want to give that up, I would communicate those if you're working with a recruiter to your recruiter directly, and they can kind of help work with the clients on that or the potential employer. And if you're working directly with a potential employer and they ask, one of, for example, a way to maybe kind of phrase your answer would be to say that, you're expecting compensation and a benefit structure similar to what you currently have. And you can say, I'm expecting a base salary, a yearly or quarterly bonus, whatever it may be. And then you can also mention, as far as additional benefits, I'm looking for dental, health, vision insurance, as well as, work from home 1 or 2 days a week if that's possible. And you can always mention that it's not a deal breaker if it isn't. If it is, feel free to mention that as well.
Great. I'm just giving you guys a heads up that if I repeat a question and you already answered it, just answer it again, because there's so many questions coming in. So, okay, Laura, this one's for you. How do I respond when the interviewer explains in the beginning of the interview that they have other candidates to interview and are limited to time, which in turn limits your ability to ask key questions at the close? Oh, actually, that's gonna be for Megan. Sorry. Or Megan or Laura. I'm sorry. Oh. My apologies. Either one.
Go ahead, Megan.
Sure. So if you're limited with time and you can't ask key questions, then I would ask what questions you can during the interview. The important thing is to do your due diligence and to have your questions answered to the extent that you can, so you know what you're walking into. You can always talk to your interviewer about what you can do if you have additional questions, who you can address those to. You can also talk with your recruiter. This is where a recruiter would be particularly helpful if you have additional questions after the interview is concluded.
Perfect. That actually goes, I'm going to just ping pong this back to you based on another question that came in. Is this a perfect opportunity then to ask for somebody's business card so that they can follow up afterward? Is that a nice open for that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can ask for a business card. Typically, the interviewer will give you their business card at the beginning of the interview. I know that when I'm meeting with people in person, I forget sometimes. So it's always really nice to have somebody ask me for my card. So you can do that either at the beginning, or I would recommend probably towards the end of the interview, actually, asking for a business card.
Perfect. And I'm guessing that helps too with those thank you notes as well.
Hey, real quick, Heather, real quick, I just want to kind of add to Megan's answer, because I think this kind of ties in. When you do go to write your thank you notes, I can't stress enough how important it is to proofread before hitting that send button. There's been several instances where candidates, maybe misspell a name, have a typo, misspell the name of the firm or the company. And it's really, really important that you have correct grammar, correct spelling, and all of that good stuff. Because if you maybe had a really good interview and then you botch your thank you email, that can have a very, quick and negative impact on your candidacy that you want to make sure that you avoid.
No, I agree. And thank you for reminding me about the one time that I did that. And obviously I'm not working at that company. Maybe that's the reason why. Okay, Laura, let's talk about dress code. How should you dress if you're a lawyer interviewing for a job at a .com or an interview company? I'm guessing that's not as, lawyery and stodgy and suit. I guess that's where that question's going.
Right. Again, the due diligence. If you're working with recruiters, they will have this information, or they can ask prior to your interview. It's always best to kind of err on the side of caution and dress professionally in a suit. And if you get the role and it calls for something different, those will be the kind of first day details that the company would be able to give you. But I say it's always better to err on the side of caution if you can't get that question answered directly.
Okay. Megan, Betsy, another money question. How can you make the potential employer tell you what they're willing to pay without disclosing your amount first?
That's a good question. I think that I feel like that's probably best answered on a case-by-case basis, given the salary legislation laws that have gone into effect in the different jurisdictions across the U.S. For example, I know it looks like there's some new ones coming out later this year, and I saw in some of the jurisdictions, if you ask the range, they have to tell you. But that's not the case for every location, city, or state. So I feel like like I said, the answer to that is probably, if you're working with a recruiter, they can help answer that for you. And if you aren't, I would do research into the law wherever you're located. I hope that helps.
Okay. Laura, I think I'm going to give this one to you. Are writing samples still required today?
Some places do require a writing sample. I've seen it more in law firms when you're getting into a litigation role rather than, a commercial contracts role in a company or things like that. So they are still in use. So I would say still have your writing sample handy and, spruce it up every once in a while if you can. But it's not as common to be asked for a writing sample these days, I found, but they are still in existence.
Is there any issue with anything that's like proprietary that you might be sharing, or should it just any guidance you can provide?
You shouldn't have anything that's very sensitive information, but if it's a general pleading or something that is, that anyone can kind of find online or, go and request at the courthouse, then that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just going back with all these questions. Let's see. Okay. I got more money questions, but I'm going to try to break out the money for a minute here. How about this one? For Megan, do you recommend an email or a handwritten note? I know you guys talked about this very briefly, but can you just go over that again since that's asked a couple times?
Email for sure.
Okay.
I recommend an email note for sure. A handwritten note is a really nice touch. But I don't think as many people are expecting it these days, to be honest with you. But as a company, I think we recommend both when you're interviewing, but an email for sure within 24 hours. And if you're working with a recruiter, talk to your recruiter about what to send. Sometimes a recruiter will be sending a thank you note on your behalf or working with the client after the interview. So if you are working with a recruiter, you can talk to them about what to send after the interview. And they can also proofread your message as to what Betsy was saying. They can make sure that your message is appropriate and free of typos.
Megan, what about if you have a group interview? What if there's like 5 people in the room or 5 people in that video call?
Separate thank you notes to each one.
You're going to be busy. Okay. Let's see here.
Hey, Heather, real quick on that. I was going to add as well. It's a personal preference of mine to do, like Megan said, do separate thank you emails for each of the folks that interview you, and be sure to add in something personal that you spoke about with each of the different interviewers. You don't want it to be the same form, just kind of generic thank you email. You want to add in a little bit of detail. For example, if you spoke with somebody specifically, about X, Y, and Z, then note that in your thank you email to that person and add a little bit of a personal touch. I think that can really help and go a long way.
Okay. How do you let somebody know, and I'm going to give this one, who haven't I given one to in a minute or two? I'm going to give Laura. How do I let them know that I really want a remote job, especially now with everything going on?
Obviously right now everything's going to probably begin remote until things open up again. That should definitely be something you talk about if you're given either a second interview or maybe prior to offer stage. With the process moving a little bit quicker, it may come up in the first interview. And to tell them that your preference is to work from home, and if that would change down the road, what that looks like, or if that you just want to stay working from home. Be clear with your expectations, so everyone is kind of on the same page and they're not agreeing to something that you think they're agreeing to something differently. So I would say just be open and honest, especially in the current climate. I can't imagine that's too much of a problem for a lot of employers.
Okay. Betsy, you talked a lot about video interviews, and just a plug here, if you haven't downloaded the handout, do it now. But Betsy, what about the pre-recorded video interview? I remember doing one of those before where you had to answer a bunch of questions and that type of thing. So they're saying, do you have any tips on dealing with a pre-recorded interview? These are where instead of live screening interview, the candidate is directed to a portal and asked to record answers to pre-recorded interview questions. I remember doing a few of these a few years back.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I know that these are certainly an option that some firms and companies have decided to go with. I would recommend for these, I think there's so many different platforms and technologies out there. I feel like it may be kind of a better answer to have a one-on-one conversation with someone about this, one of us at MLA. But generally, I've heard that it looks like sometimes they have a countdown clock, so when you're going to start running out of time, because I have heard that there are timed answers to some of those questions. If you're using a certain software, or if you're going to be using a certain online website, maybe go to that website. Sometimes they have how-to guides or tutorials that you can watch, and I've also seen that some even have practice answer questions that you can do as well. So even though you aren't going to know the questions ahead of time, you can get comfortable with just talking to yourself in front of the camera on your computer, and that will just at least help you to become a little bit more comfortable before you go into it, so you're not going into it completely blindly. Those are just kind of some general tips that I have generally about that situation. But if you know that you're going to be using a certain technology, or if you're working with a recruiter, that's where the recruiter can become really handy too, and say, you know what, last year we worked with this same employer. We had several candidates do these types of interviews, and they can say, this is what those candidates said, would have been helpful for them to know ahead of time, or here's some specific tips that they gave me for the next go round. So that's where a recruiter can really be beneficial for your candidacy as well.
Okay, let's see. Megan, let's see here. How do you answer the question, how are you looking for, why are you looking for a new position, and how do you say it so you don't sound trite and disingenuous and basically sound like you're, that you really are looking for a new opportunity?
I think if you write it down, your answer sounds trite, but when you're speaking from the heart, so to speak, I don't think it sounds trite at all to say that you're looking for a new opportunity, that you're looking to grow, that there are certain things that you would like to do in your current organization that there's just no opportunity to do. I've had candidates who have gotten new degrees and they're looking for a new position because they've gotten a new degree and they want to use it. So I think, like Laura said during her conversation, talking about why you're looking for a new position in the most positive way possible, it really doesn't sound trite. It sounds like you're you're moving ahead and moving forward. And a lot of employers actually like to hear that people want to develop their talents and with a new employer. So.
Good. Okay. And then I'm going to give this one right back to you just because you did those most important questions to ask. What
Sure.
if you only have time for 3 questions, what 3 questions do you think, it says in preparing for an interview, what are the 3 questions you think that person should be prepared to answer? I'm sorry, I read it wrong. So not what you're asking as the candidate, but what 3 questions should you be ready to answer from the client, from the interviewer?
You should be able to talk about everything on your resume. You should have a couple of specific examples of successes from each job, but if you have a bullet point on your resume, you need to be able to talk about that experience in pretty good detail. So that's one. The second one, you should be able to answer questions about why you're looking for a new position. And the third, if you have any gaps on your resume, you should be prepared to address those. I would rehearse answers to all 3 of these questions with your recruiter, with a friend. I would just rehearse your answers so you know what you're going to say before you walk into the interview.
Okay. Laura, do interviewers have the right, or do they ever ask about posts you made on LinkedIn? I mean, and about your social media, are they aware of what's going on, and do people ever get asked those questions?
Yes, absolutely. I think all employers, I know I do a social media check on candidates that I'm presenting and whatnot, and just to see if anything comes up. But if you have talked bad about an employer or said something, off color on your social media, I would say do a big scrape of your social media if you are interviewing, because employers can look, depending on your privacy settings, they can find you. So if there's something on there that you don't want to speak about, then I would take it off for sure.
Okay. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I still have a ton of more questions going in, and some of them are obviously very specific, it seems like, to people's individual candidacy. So I'm going to basically allow you guys, if you don't mind, both Megan, Betsy, and Laura, I'll divvy these up with you afterward because I think they're better to address one-on-one. But I think that is going to be the end for today because I think we're starting to get the same questions over and over again, as well as some ones that are very specific to people directly. And I want you guys to be able to, handle them one-on-one. So I want to thank, of course, my ladies out in Chicago today for doing this with me today. Thank you, Megan, Betsy, and Laura, for getting us super prepared for our next interview. We'd like to have you all join us again in the fall on September 30th when we discuss partnering with your recruiter with my colleagues in New York and New Jersey. As previously mentioned, at the end of the webinar, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. We really hope that you'll take it. It's only about 6 or 7 questions. It'll ask about how we did today, as well as any other topics you'd like to hear from us, because I'm sure Megan, Betsy, and Laura are looking to do another webinar with me sometime in the fall. So thanks again. Enjoy your summer, everybody, and be well. Thanks. Bye.